evidence you have of how life got started, and corollary to the question, when, where, why, and how did this life learn to reproduce itself? How do you go from asexual to sexual reproduction?
Those are two different questions in your seminar notebook, and I'll be happy to respond to the first one. Grade 56, please. Any scientist should know that why questions are beyond the scope of science, so this is another straw man. We have a few problems in the origin of early life, and there is one chicken and egg problem. How do you get amino acids to polymerize? Well, you go for something that's a little bit easier to polymerize. And things like thioesters would have been abundant on a volcanic sulfurous early Earth, and they polymerize without catalysts. Early catalysts might have been metals, not proteins. And what kind of evidence do we have of this? Iron-sulfur proteins in our enzymes, evidence of an earlier time. And low expectations. You know, who said life had to be anything like we have now? Next, please. What is the probability of life just happening? Probably pretty poor, but there was a lot of molecular pre-adaptation. RNA can be a catalyst as well as a blueprint. And very primitive cells could have been around without the sophisticated chemistry that we have today. Next, please. What about ATP? Hey, that's a complex chemical. Well, there are several organisms today that still use inorganic phosphate. That is also the source of high-energy phosphate bonds, and that would have been very abundant on the early Earth. And a chemical fossil, the purple non-sulfur bacterium Rhodospirillum rubrum, happens to use both ATP and inorganic phosphate. Next, please. What about information from energy? This is how energy is stored, poly-A. What if there was an inclusion of a wrong base, many bases and no replication, then base pairing, then replicative elongation? This is a plausible scenario. And last, please. A smaller, simpler genetic code, fewer amino acids. If we repeat a design theorist calculation using only 8 different amino acids and proteins 20 amino acids long, you can get a specific protein with a small pond's worth of bacteria. There might be one more. Yeah, and science has created, if your definition of life is that which evolves and reproduces, been there, done that, 1993.
All right, textbooks say that first, self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. I mean, it just must have happened. We're here. That's the logic. First self-living cells emerged between 4 billion and 8 billion, 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of this event. Biology textbook by Wadsworth did it. Have they produced life in the laboratory? Absolutely not. Not come anywhere close. Let me tell you what they did do. Miller and Urey both, and everybody, and Oprah and all these guys, have carefully excluded oxygen. They used what's called a reducing atmosphere. There's a reason they did this, because oxygen causes a problem. Oxygen will oxidize anything that is created. So they took oxygen out of their experiment for fear it would oxidize whatever was created. The problem is, without oxygen, you can't have ozone. And ozone blocks UV light. UV light is what destroys ammonia. And Miller and Urey used, Stanley Miller and Urey and Oprah, they used ammonia in their experiment. But ammonia is destroyed by UV light, so you have to have oxygen to protect it. Also, oxygen is found in the lowest rock layers. Michael Denton, page 61. Michael Denton, a far cry. That was a minute? Yep. Buy my videotape number 4, and you'll answer all these.
Okay, in your section on genetics, you talk about numbers of chromosomes being related to complexity. I'd like to know where you got the idea that the number of chromosomes is the sole measure of complexity.
The chart in my seminar notebook showing the complexity of animals based upon their chromosome number is a spoof on evolution, showing that how penicillin only has 2 chromosomes, fruit flies have 8, tomatoes and houseflies both have 12. The number of chromosomes does not follow at all the expected evolutionary pattern. If your argument is that the length of the chromosome or something else in the chromosome is giving more information, I would point out that you're, again, begging the question. The fact is, they do have more chromosomes. The fern has 480 chromosomes. Man only has 46. Amoebas have 50. They have more chromosomes than we do. And we're supposed to have come from an amoeba. Tobacco has 48. We keep evolving, we're going to be a tobacco plant. So the purpose of that was to show how silly the idea is. The only textbook I found that even dealt with the question of chromosome number was one biology textbook in a college library that I found that said the number of chromosomes does not seem to follow the expected evolutionary pattern. Then it said, therefore, we feel the evidence is irrelevant. Anything that happens to go against the evolution theory will be carefully excluded from the kids' education. They're not getting educated, they're getting indoctrinated into one worldview. Now, if somebody wants to believe in evolution, that doesn't bother me. If they want to use my tax dollars to pay for my kids to have to learn that junk, that bothers me. They ought to go teach evolution. Whoever wants to pay and come learn it and get it out of our school system. Macroevolution has nothing whatsoever to do with science. Nothing at all.
And be sure you ask Kent Hovind whether he pays his income taxes. There is no correlation between the number of chromosomes and complexity. This is simply another Hovind straw man argument. And I can't be responsible for the poor things that have been said in biology books everywhere. Some of them are written rather poorly, and I think he's gotten most of them and gotten them up on his slides here. Zebras and horses have virtually the same DNA, but vastly different numbers of chromosomes. And the giant panda, the brown bear, and the spectacled bear, all different numbers of chromosomes. This is no big deal to a biologist.
Do I respond or ask a question? Question. I would sure like to respond to that one. Questions are all listed in my seminar notebook. You can get on my website and order any of my stuff, and none of it's copyrighted. Feel free to do anything you'd like with it. Let's see, let's pick one here. You never did answer the question, when, where, why, and how did life learn to reproduce itself? That was the second question. Tell me how reproduction got started from asexual reproduction. Or why would any organism want to reproduce itself? That's going to make more mouths to feed, increase competition. Looks to me like something they wouldn't want to do. Why, when, where, and how did they learn to do that?
Now, you said that any plant or animal wouldn't want to reproduce more of its kind. How many kids do you have? Did you think about that when you were having number 3? The first cell capable of sexual reproducing. Well, there are a lot of steps along the way. Bacteria conjugate, they exchange genetic material. And the best estimate of when sexual reproduction occurred, maybe 1 billion years ago. There seems to be a big diversification of protists at this time. All eukaryotes have the ability to undergo fusion or form diploid, and fission via meiosis to form haploid cells. Yeasts have kind of a schizophrenic life as diploids or haploids. Amoebas, corals, aphids, strawberries all reproduce by fission, but sexual reproduction is a huge adaptive advantage. You get genetic variability, and you might even get rid of maladaptive genes. Mating doesn't control which genes of yours you pass along, but it sure does restrict